There is a question many people ask, but few are willing to sit with in silence. Why does a man become disloyal? At first, the mind rushes to blame. We point at temptation, at opportunity, at other people. But if you look deeper, beyond the surface, you begin to see that disloyalty is not an action that appears suddenly. It is a slow process, a quiet drift, a disconnection that begins long before anyone else is involved. A man does not wake up one day and decide to betray. He first loses connection with himself. Disloyalty does not begin in the moment a man crosses a boundary. It begins much earlier, in a place that is often ignored within himself. From the outside, it may look like a sudden decision, an impulsive mistake, or the result of temptation. But if you observe carefully, you will notice that the action is only the final step of a much longer inner process. Before a man becomes disloyal to someone else, he slowly becomes disconnected from his own center. This disconnection is subtle at first. It may begin with small compromises, ignoring his own values, avoiding difficult conversations, or choosing comfort over honesty. Each time he turns away from what he knows is right, he weakens the relationship he has with himself. Over time, this creates a quiet inner conflict. He may still appear committed on the surface, but inside, there is confusion, restlessness, and a lack of clarity. When a man is not grounded within himself, he begins to feel unstable. He may not understand this feeling directly, but he experiences it as dissatisfaction or emptiness. Instead of addressing the root cause, he often looks outward. He seeks something to fill that space. Attention, validation, excitement, or novelty. These external things do not solve the problem, but they temporarily distract him from it. In this state, his awareness becomes weaker. He is no longer fully present in his relationship because his mind is divided. Part of him is engaged, but another part is searching. This inner division makes it easier for him to cross lines he once respected, not because he intentionally wants to betray, but because he has already drifted away from the discipline and clarity that once guided his actions. The important thing to understand is that temptation alone is not enough to cause disloyalty. Temptation exists everywhere, for everyone, but a man who is deeply connected to himself does not easily lose direction. He recognizes his impulses, but he is not controlled by them. However, when that inner connection is weak, even small temptations can appear powerful. They seem to offer something he feels he is missing within. As this internal disconnection grows, he begins to justify his behavior. The mind creates stories to protect itself, reasons that make his actions feel acceptable. He may tell himself that something is lacking in his relationship, or that he deserves something more. But these are often reflections of his inner state rather than objective truth. The problem is not always what he has. It is how disconnected he has become from appreciating and sustaining it. Over time, this distance from himself becomes normal. He stops questioning his actions deeply. He stops listening to that quiet inner voice that once guided him. And when that voice becomes silent, there is nothing left to hold him accountable from within. At that point, disloyalty is no longer a difficult choice. It becomes an easy one. So what appears on the outside as betrayal is often the result of an inner neglect that has been building for a long time. It is not the presence of another person that creates disloyalty, but the absence of self-awareness, discipline, and inner alignment. A man who lacks self-mastery does not suddenly lose control in one moment. He gradually hands that control over, piece by piece, until his impulses begin to lead him instead of his values. At the beginning, it may seem harmless. A thought arises, a desire appears, and instead of observing it with awareness, he follows it, not because he must, but because he has not trained himself to pause. This is how impulse begins to take root, not as something powerful on its own, but as something repeatedly obeyed. Self-mastery is not about suppressing desire. It is about understanding it without becoming enslaved by it. When a man does not develop this understanding, every feeling becomes urgent, every urge feels important, and every temptation appears meaningful. He begins to confuse what is immediate with what is important. The mind, when undisciplined, seeks comfort and stimulation. It avoids resistance. It moves toward what feels good now without considering what it costs later. In this state, there is no space between feeling and action. A thought comes, and it is followed. An attraction appears, and it is entertained. A moment of boredom arises, and it is quickly filled. Without awareness, he becomes reactive. His actions are no longer guided by intention, but by whatever feeling is strongest in the moment. This is the absence of self-mastery, not chaos, but unconscious repetition. Over time, this pattern strengthens. Each time he gives in to impulse, he reinforces the habit of giving in. It becomes easier, more automatic. What once required a decision now happens without thinking. This is why disloyalty is rarely a single isolated act. It is usually the result of many smaller moments where discipline was not practiced. Moments where he chose ease over integrity, distraction over awareness, and desire over responsibility. An undisciplined mind also seeks novelty. It becomes restless with what is familiar. Stability begins to feel like stagnation, and consistency feels like limitation. This creates a dangerous illusion that something new will bring fulfillment. But this search is not driven by truth. It is driven by the inability to sit with stillness. A man who cannot be at peace with what he has will always be tempted by what he does not have. Impulse does not consider consequences. It does not reflect on commitment, trust, or long-term meaning. It only responds to what feels rewarding in the present moment. When a man lives under the control of impulse, he becomes disconnected from the deeper values that require patience, and discipline. Loyalty, in its true form, is not an emotion. It is a practice. It requires consistency, awareness, and the strength to act according to principle rather than feeling. Without self-mastery, even a man with good intentions can act against them. He may genuinely value loyalty, yet fail to embody it. Not because he does not care, but because he has not developed the inner strength to remain steady when tested. Desire becomes louder than discipline, and in that imbalance, his actions begin to drift away from what he once believed was right. When there is no control over the mind, there is no control over behavior. And when behavior is driven by impulse, it becomes unpredictable, unstable, and easily influenced by external circumstances. In such a state, loyalty cannot be sustained, not because it is impossible, but because it requires a level of inner order that has not yet been cultivated. Emotional emptiness does not always feel like a clear void. It is often quiet, hidden beneath daily routines and distractions. A man may continue living his life, fulfilling responsibilities, even appearing content on the surface, yet within him there is a subtle sense that something is missing. He may not have the words to describe it, but he feels it in moments of stillness, an unease, a lack of fulfillment, a disconnection from meaning. This emptiness does not come from a lack of external things. It is not necessarily about what he has or does not have in his relationship. It is deeper than that. It comes from a lack of inner connection. When he is no longer fully present with himself, no longer aware of his own emotional state, no longer aligned with what truly matters to him. When this connection weakens, he begins to feel incomplete, even if everything around him appears stable. Instead of turning inward to understand this feeling, he often turns outward to escape it. The mind looks for something that can quickly change how he feels. Attention from others becomes more appealing. New conversations feel more exciting. Small moments of validation begin to carry more weight than they should. These experiences create temporary relief, a brief sense of being seen, appreciated, or alive again. But this relief is not real fulfillment. It is only a distraction from the emptiness that still exists underneath, because the root of the feeling has not been addressed. The need for these external sources continues to grow. What once felt like a small boost becomes something he starts to rely on. He begins to associate these external interactions with the feeling of being complete, even though they only provide a short-lived illusion. As this pattern develops, his perception starts to shift. He may begin to believe that something is lacking in his current relationship, not necessarily because it is true, but because his internal state is influencing how he sees everything. When a man feels empty inside, even genuine connection can feel insufficient. He may overlook what is present and focus only on what feels missing. This creates a dangerous misunderstanding. He starts to think that the solution lies outside, perhaps in another person, another experience, another source of excitement. But what he is truly searching for cannot be found there. The emptiness is not created by the absence of others. It is created by the absence of self-awareness and emotional presence within himself. In this state, boundaries become weaker, not because he intends to cross them, but because his need for emotional stimulation becomes stronger than his sense of responsibility. Night, he begins to justify small actions, conversations, attention, moments of connection, that slowly move him closer to disloyalty. Each step feels insignificant on its own, but together they form a pattern. The deeper the emptiness becomes, the more convincing the illusion feels. He starts to believe that what he is experiencing externally is meaningful, even necessary. But this belief is shaped by a feeling that has not been understood. He is not responding to reality as it is. He is responding to a lack within himself that he has not yet faced. Without awareness, this cycle continues. The more he seeks outside, the further he moves away from addressing what is inside, and the further he moves away from himself. The stronger the emptiness becomes, quietly driving his actions in ways he does not fully recognize. True loyalty is often misunderstood as something that is given outwardly, as if it depends only on the presence of another person or the strength of a relationship. But loyalty, in its deepest form, is not created in interaction with others. It is built in the way a man relates to himself. Before he can remain consistent with someone else, he must first learn to remain consistent within his own mind, his own values, and his own actions. Inner discipline is the foundation of this consistency. It is the ability to act according to what is right, even when it is uncomfortable, even when no one is watching. Without this discipline, loyalty becomes fragile. It depends on mood, on circumstances, on how he feels in a given moment, and feelings are constantly changing. If a man only acts based on how he feels, then his loyalty will rise and fall with those feelings. Discipline creates stability where emotion cannot. It gives a man the strength to pause before acting, to observe his thoughts instead of immediately following them. When an impulse arises, discipline allows him to recognize it without being controlled by it. This pause is small, but it is powerful. In that moment of awareness, he has a choice: to act in alignment with his values or to move against them. A man who has developed this inner structure does not rely on external pressure to stay loyal. He does not need fear of consequences to guide him. His actions are guided by a deeper understanding of who he chooses to be. This is what makes loyalty natural, rather than forced. It is not something he struggles to maintain. It is something that reflects his character. Without discipline, however, remain only ideas. A man may believe in honesty, commitment, and respect, but when he is tested, those beliefs are easily overridden by desire or convenience. Discipline is what turns belief into action. It is what allows him to remain steady when distractions appear, when opportunities arise, when no one would know if he chose differently. Inner discipline also requires honesty with oneself. A man must be willing to see his own weaknesses, his own patterns, and his own tendencies without denial. Avoiding this truth weakens discipline because it prevents growth. When he becomes aware of where he is vulnerable, he can begin to strengthen those areas. This awareness is not about judgment. It is about clarity. Over time, this practice builds trust, not just with others, but within himself. He begins to trust that he will act in accordance with his values, even in difficult situations. This self-trust creates a sense of inner peace. He is no longer divided between what he believes and how he behaves. There is alignment, and in that alignment, there is strength. When a man reaches this level of discipline, loyalty is no longer dependent on external conditions. It does not change based on attention, temptation, or emotional fluctuation. It remains steady because it is rooted in something deeper than circumstance. It becomes part of how he lives, how he thinks, and how he moves through the world. In the absence of this discipline, loyalty feels like a burden, something that requires constant effort and resistance. But when discipline is present, loyalty becomes effortless, not because there are no challenges, but because his response to those challenges is already shaped by the structure he has built within himself. In the end, disloyalty is not a mystery. It is a mirror. It reflects a man's relationship with himself more than it reflects his relationship with anyone else. What appears on the surface as betrayal is often the final expression of something that has been quietly unfolding within for a long time. A slow disconnection, a lack of awareness, a mind that was never trained to be still, and a heart that was never taught to remain grounded. When you begin to see this clearly, the focus shifts. It is no longer about blaming the outside world, nor is it about simplifying the issue into right and wrong. It becomes about understanding the inner condition that allows such actions to take place, because without that understanding, the pattern only repeats again and again in different forms, under different circumstances. A man who is disconnected from himself will always be searching, and a man who is always searching will struggle to remain loyal, not because loyalty is beyond him, but because he has not yet learned how to be complete within himself. He looks for fulfillment in places where it cannot last, and in doing so, he moves further away from the very thing he seeks. But there is another path, a path where a man turns inward instead of outward, where he begins to observe his thoughts, his desires, and his patterns without immediately reacting to them, where he builds the strength to sit with discomfort rather than escape it. This is not easy work. It requires patience, honesty, and discipline. but it is the only way to create something real. Because loyalty, in its truest form, is not about restriction. It is about alignment. It is what happens when a man's actions match his values, when his mind is no longer divided, when he is no longer pulled in different directions by every passing desire. In that state, there is clarity, there is stability, there is a quiet confidence that does not need to prove itself through external validation. And from this place, loyalty is no longer a question. It is no longer something he struggles to maintain or something that depends on circumstances. It becomes natural because it is rooted in something deeper than emotion or impulse. It is rooted in who he has chosen to become. So the real transformation does not begin by trying to control behavior on the surface. It begins by strengthening the foundation within, by developing awareness where there was once distraction, by building discipline where there was once impulsiveness, by creating a sense of wholeness where there was once emptiness. Only then can a man truly stand firm, unshaken by temptation, undistracted by illusion, and unmoved by the need to seek outside what he has already built within. And when that happens, loyalty is no longer something he gives. It is something he lives.